Welcome to this, the third podcast in the series by Chiltern called Think the Unthinkable. The first in the series was about why all members of the family, including children just becoming adults, need to have wills. The second was about why we all need to have powers of attorney to deal with sudden or progressive loss of mental capacity, or the physical inability to conduct our own affairs. This third podcast deals with who should be an executor under a will and who should be an attorney under a lifetime power of attorney. This will take a while, so we're going to do it in two parts. The first will deal with some general issues and the choice of executors. The second part will deal with attorneys and bring out some of the key differences between choosing and preparing the right executors and attorneys. The most obvious observation about executors and attorneys is that they need to understand their briefs and have the information to carry them out. So they should be properly consulted on what the person wants and what's expected of them. The will and power of attorney documents and any letters of wishes should be clear and concise. They should have access to key data and documents. We live in an unparalleled technological era. We don't have simple bank accounts with paper statements anymore. We have passwords, apps, and devices. If there's no orderly source of important information, the job may be beyond difficult. Phone, tablet, or laptop-based bank and investment account apps may be the only place where some assets can be traced. No access to the device, and the assets can be lost forever. Passwords need to be secure, but they also need to be accessible by executors and attorneys. Private company shares, tokens, crypto investments, they're all shrouded in mystery, hidden behind security protocols, which are fine and give reassurance when someone is alive or of sound mind. But when an executor or attorney tries to pick up the pieces, they can be a minefield. The assets may be confined to cyberspace for eternity. You may have heard the story about the Welshman who threw away a hard drive in 2013 during an office clear-out. That hard drive contained the private key to a digital wallet with 8,000 bitcoins, which he'd mined back in 2009 when the cryptocurrency was worth almost nothing. Today, those bitcoins are valued at over £600 million. He's been desperately trying to get the council to let him search the landfill site. The council has so far refused, citing environmental concerns, and a judge threw out his case, based on saying that the site was essential for the local community. All the time, the council knew it was closing the site, and now it has announced that. So he's trying to buy the site and has hired the council employee who managed the site and can pinpoint where the refuse went. Just imagine being his executor. Do you not bother? Do you buy the land? Do you fight the case for excavation that will cost a huge amount of money? If successful in finding the hoard, there'll be £240 million tax bill. What do you do? This extreme example illustrates why preparation and availability of information can be crucial. If your executors do not know about your online accounts or cannot access them, those assets might as well be in a landfill. This itself can pose a dilemma. Many people making wills or powers of attorney do not necessarily want to broadcast all their financial, medical, and personal information, or disclose all their passwords to family or friends while they're still alive and capable. There are ways of storing private data so that it only becomes available when the time comes, and executors and attorneys need to access it. This needs careful, advanced planning. So, the messages are pick the right executors and attorneys, make sure they know what they're supposed to do, and give them the tools to do it. Executors are there to deal with the aftermath of death. Callous as it may sound, death is simply an event. The job of executors is to deal with the consequences and wind up the deceased person's estate as quickly as possible. The executors need to identify and collect the assets, pay off the debts, including tax, and then distribute what's left in accordance with the will. In summary, this is a pretty simple brief. There should be an intense period of activity, and the estate should be wound up as quickly and efficiently as possible. As a group, the executors will certainly need to have a working understanding of accountancy, property transactions, investments, and tax. An understanding of when to involve external professionals will be important. Efficiency and attention to detail will be key characteristics. Sometimes there will be forensic work to do, tracing assets, debts, obligations, and income sources. All of this is very doable, and if the estate has been well planned and the will is explicit with clear letters of wishes, then the process can be largely mechanical. That is in an ideal world. But sometimes there'll be areas of judgment on when and how to liquidate and distribute assets. Family diplomacy may be necessary in terms of who gets what from chattels such as watches, art, jewellery, motor cars. There may be children, and the will may simply specify wishes with regard to their guardianship, care, and education. This can put a huge burden on an executor to do the best, not only for the legacy of the deceased person, but also for the children themselves. This is where soft and nurturing skills can come in. Sadly, not every will is up to date and concise. Not every estate is in order. Assets may be missing. Data may be chaotic. Records of gifts, income, capital gains, and other tax issues may be unclear. Not every family will be harmonious. There may be resentment and dispute. An executor will need to be able to process the tasks at hand. They're only truly known at the point of death, and the executors have to deal with whatever comes. Death is the ultimate certainty. So at some point, executors will always be needed. The challenge will be ensuring that they're the right people at the right time. Executors who are right for the estate of a relatively young person with a young and growing family, needing emotional and psychological support, as well as financial certainty and security, may well be very different from the ideal executors for someone who is mature, with accumulated wealth, and an adult family. There can be a sole executor, but the risks are obvious. So normally there'll be at least two and often more. What's sometimes not appreciated is that executors can act severally. So in theory, each executor can do its own thing. If one executor were a loose cannon, doing things which might damage the estate and its beneficiaries, the other executors and/or the beneficiaries could apply to the courts for removal. That is very messy and a last resort. The ideal is to have executors who, in aggregate, have the right combination of skills, a clear understanding of their duties and their obligations, and the time to fulfill them, and act in the best interests of all the beneficiaries. This is a tall order, and it's important to have checks and balances in place between the inevitably different characters and skills of the chosen group. They need to be able to act as a team, but also be willing to nominate one or more of their numbers to do the hard yards of pulling everything together. An analogy is appointing a good management team for a project in a business where time's of the essence and everyone's working towards a common goal. But the level of involvement in the project, in this case winding up the estate, can be different for each manager. The final point to consider with executors is whether they'll have an enduring role beyond just winding up the estate. Many wills are drafted to create will trusts, which may handle large parts of the family wealth, perhaps for decades to come. Often the will simply says, "My executors will be the first trustees." The duties and skills of ongoing trustees are potentially very different to those of executors who are appointed to do a finite job. The choice of trustees is a different subject for a different time. But the point of raising this now is that when the will is actually being drafted, the presumption that those executors are the right people to be trustees should be carefully considered. So, that concludes part 1 of this podcast. When you're ready, please listen to part 2, which focuses on attorneys.